So good morning, everyone. As part of our Heart Failure Awareness Week, we're running a series of talks. And today we're joined by Orna O'Brien, who's a dietitian with ourselves here at the Irish Heart Foundation. So I'm just going to give a brief introduction to Orna, and then I'm going to hand over to her, and she's going to start her talk. So Orna is a core registered senior dietitian specialising in heart health and is a dietitian for the Irish Heart Foundation. In her role with the Irish Heart Foundation, she coordinates nutrition information for the public, health professionals and patient support groups, and leads several health promotion programmes across at-risk communities. Prior to joining the Irish Heart Foundation, she worked clinically for several years at St. James's Hospital across a wide range of areas, including cardiology, cardiac surgery and cardiac rehabilitation. She's passionate about all aspects of heart health and loves supporting people to achieve their health goals. So Orna, if you want to take it away there.
Great, thanks a million, Maeve, and thank you so much for inviting me on to speak today. And yeah, it's a real pleasure to be here talking to you all. So I'm going to talk about the nutrition essentials in heart failure. And I know that there's nutrition and what we eat on a day-to-day basis has a huge impact on our health. And there can be an awful lot of fear around food, what to eat, what not to eat, especially when you're living with heart failure. So my goal and my hope for this talk is that you come out the other side feeling a bit more in control of the food side of things. And really, we're going to be talking about what changes and to make to what you eat every day and how to go about that. And, I just want to start off by acknowledging that changing your diet can be quite difficult. Changing the way you're eating can be a challenge, especially if you've been eating a certain way for many years. So I want to remind you can do this really gradually at your own pace. And change is always difficult, but it does get easier with time. So in this talk, we'll talk a bit about what the idea of healthy eating looks like, because I think that we have way too much focus on weight, on shape, on the clean eating and low fat this, low carb that. And there's a huge amount of misinformation out there that is incredibly confusing. And we also hear a lot, is this good or bad for me? Or can I eat this? Is this allowed? And this idea that you need to cut out foods and exclude foods to be healthy. But actually, true healthy eating is avoiding diet culture, planning your meals and your shopping lists, and listening to your body and respecting your body. So really, my approach to food is that there is so much more to a heart healthy diet than reducing certain foods. So it's really about adding in these therapeutic foods and nutrients that your body needs to, improve your blood flow, have a regular heartbeat, optimize the health of your blood vessels and your veins and your arteries. And if we do this, if we focus on adding in these foods, we can make real improvements to blood pressure control. We can address the underlying inflammation and oxidative stress that can happen when you live with heart disease. And we can really support heart function, reduce your risk of exacerbations and heart attacks and strokes, etc. So what are we going to cover today? We're going to look at how your food choices can help you manage heart failure or heart inefficiency, as I prefer to call it. Do you need to follow a special diet? And if you do, what did that look like? And the nutrition essentials. So what are the things you really need to know about eating when you have heart inefficiency? we'll do a bit on salt because it is always a very popular topic. And then really importantly, listening to and honoring your body's signals. We're also going to touch on what to do if you have a poor appetite, because that can come up quite a lot, and for various different reasons, but the advice is very different. So it's important that we talk about it. And then, of course, as Maeve said, we're going to have lots of time for questions and answers at the end. And if there is anything that you would like to ask throughout, as Maeve said, just pop it in the chat and we will get to it. So how can your food choices help manage heart failure or heart inefficiency? So they can they can reduce the number of your quality of life, essentially. So your shortness of breath sensations, your fluid, holding fluid around your body, how many times you need to get admitted to hospital, your general quality of life, your energy levels, and also in the long run as well, looking at reducing your cholesterol, improving blood pressure control, and reducing your risk of a heart attack or a stroke. So do you need to follow a special diet? The answer is no. So it's the way of eating and drinking that we recommend for people living with heart failure is no different really to what we recommend for the whole nation. You might have heard lots of different diets mentioned. So for example, the Mediterranean diet, the DASH diet, the food pyramid, but they all actually have an awful lot in common in that if you look at this food pyramid here, you can see that it's mainly that the bigger groups at the bottom are all based around mainly whole foods that are minimally processed. So lots of plant-based foods like fruit, vegetables, whole grains. There's lots of beans, nuts, seeds in there. There's also some dairy, some poultry, fish, seafood, eggs, some meat, but trying to limit excessive meat intakes. Small amounts of healthy fats and oils, and really trying to minimize those top shelf foods that are high in fat, sugar, and salt. And limiting alcohol, obviously, and trying to use herbs and spices to flavor foods instead of relying on salt. But if I was to say, forget all of the detail of today, if I wanted you to go away with one piece of information from this talk, it would just be try to fill your plate with half full of fruit and vegetables. So I always like using the plate model, which you see here, as an example of what we should be aiming for at every meal. And it doesn't have to be every meal, but if you have this in mind if you're doing groceries, if you are preparing food, does the volume of the fruit veg salad look like it's about half of the meal? And if you can do this, half a plate of fruit or vegetables, a quarter of it from some protein food, and a quarter of it from some kind of high fiber starchy food like whole grains. If you can do that 3 times a day, then that is 90% of it. And including a glass of water with that as well. So regardless, in terms of hydration, we don't really recommend any fluid restriction unless your team, your own medical team has advised it. So drink to thirst is what I would say regarding fluids. And obviously we want to avoid anything that's going to dehydrate us, like alcohol. But one of the most simple and important things that we can do for our health is simply just making sure we're hydrated enough. So we lose about a pint of water every night when we sleep just from breathing. So it's a good idea in the morning to have a nice big glass of water or milk or tea, whatever you like. Coffee is also fine if you enjoy it. And just trying to include it throughout the day. So filling half your plate with fruit or veg, quarter protein and quarter whole grains, and making water your drink of choice. That is 90% of it. But if we do want to delve into this in a bit more detail, we can go through the food pyramid shelf by shelf. So on the bottom shelf here, we have our fruit and vegetables and salad. So these foods are obviously high in vitamins, minerals, fiber. We know they're good for our health. They tend to be very low in fat and salt as well. And we're recommended to have about 5 to 7 portions a day, but there's evidence to show that, you know, even up to 10 portions a day is wonderful. So if you can even get 7, that would be amazing. But a portion is like, there's lots of ways you can describe portions in specific ways, but just to keep things simple, I always say a portion is about the size of a woman's fist, okay? So if you're trying to get that 5 times a day at least, and about 1 in 3 of us in Ireland meet our 5 a day. So we're not great, but that being said, we are the best in Europe, which is good to know. We have the best fruit and veg intake in Europe. So that's a positive. So we're leading the way with that. And really make life easy on yourself when it comes to fruit and veg. I always say, you know, obviously fresh is great. Frozen is also really handy, especially if food waste is a concern for you. Tinned is also fine, dried, pre-chopped, you know, if that makes things easier. So just whatever you need to do to get more into your day, go for it. The next shelf then that we have here are our starchy foods. So these are wholemeal cereals, pastas, potatoes, rice, breads. So these are all our energy foods. They're kind of the fuel that keeps us going throughout the day. And you'll notice here that there's a big focus on high fiber options. So in Ireland, our fiber requirements are about 25 to 29 grams a day, and at least 80% of us aren't meeting that fiber requirement. So we're hugely fiber deficient in Ireland. So there's lots of very simple ways that we can make changes here to increase our fiber slightly more. So switching from white bread to, you know, a whole grain bread. There's so many types out there now. It's kind of a case of finding one that you really enjoy. And another thing is instead of Rice Krispies or cornflakes, trying to choose a higher fiber breakfast cereal, for example, porridge or Weetabix or bran flakes, all bran, that kind of thing, or just some whole grain toast as well. Switching white rice to brown rice, white pasta to brown pasta, and trying to keep the skins on potatoes. And sometimes using, you know, the baby potatoes that have a lovely thin skin on them, they can be a bit easier to eat if you're not the biggest fan of skins. So lots of small practical ways that you can get added fiber in there. And another one that I'd really like to shout out is oats and barley from this shelf. So oats and barley contain a special type of fiber called beta glucan, and it shows that if you regularly have enough oats and fiber, or oats and barley in your eating every day, that you can reduce your cholesterol by about 5 to 10%, which is really powerful. And on a label, you want to look for things that contain 6 grams of fiber per 100 grams. That's the mark. That's what we would consider 5 gram or high in fiber. So anything over 6 grams of fiber per 100 grams. The next shelf is milk, yogurt, and cheese. And so these foods, dairy foods, really high in, you know, protein and calcium and lots of important nutrients. Also really important for blood pressure. So if you have high blood pressure, including these foods can help to reduce your blood pressure. And if you do have high cholesterol, it's a good idea to go for the lower fat or reduced fat versions of them. Now, we're onto our protein shelf. So these are the foods that really, we need these foods for growth, for repair of our body, our tissues, but they're really what feeds our muscles and our bones. And our bones and muscles need to be fed really every 3 to 5 hours, especially if we're over the age of 30, because we tend to break down more muscle than we build, and the same with bones. So we're typically quite good at our protein intake at dinner time, but we're okay at lunch, but we're pretty bad at breakfast time. So if you are looking to increase your protein intake, doing so at breakfast is a really good idea by maybe adding some eggs, some beans, by adding a Greek yogurt that's high in protein, and those kind of things, or making porridge on milk instead of water. So they're all going to bump up your protein intake at breakfast. And that will also help with your appetite later on in the day. So people who tend to have a more high protein breakfast tend to snack less on sugary foods later on in the evening. And then variety is really important on this shelf. So making sure that your protein is coming from a nice mix of both, meat, fish, eggs, and beans, chickpeas, a plant and animal sources. So trying to include fish twice a week, and trying to include an oily fish like salmon, mackerel, trout, or herring once a week is great. So the next shelf we have here then are the fat spreads and oils. So these are foods that we all need to have in our diets, but in small amounts. And there's some simple things that we can do to make sure most of the fats and oils that we're eating are going to protect our heart. And one of those is, instead of butter, seeing can we make some heart healthy swaps. So from butter either to a low fat spread, or some kind of a nut butter like peanut butter, almond butter, or smashed avocado, or hummus, or pesto, or olive tapenade. So there's lots of alternatives out there to butter. Another thing is, if you're using coconut oil a lot in your baking or in your cooking, can you switch that or butter to olive oil, rapeseed oil, or vegetable oil? And as well as that, could you try more fat-free cooking methods as well? And instead of mayonnaise, full-fat mayonnaise, could you switch to the low-fat option? So there's lots of small things that we can do there. And then the last shelf is all these kind of discretionary foods that tend to be high in saturated fat, sugar, and salt. So crisps, biscuits, muffins, chocolate, biscuits. I find that there's no point in saying just to eat less, because it's very difficult to do that if it's a habit that's deeply ingrained for you. If you're having something from the shelf a couple of times a week, it's not going to make a huge difference to your heart health. If this is something that you think you're eating these foods every day or multiple times a day, then it probably will have an impact on your heart health, but also, tooth decay and other aspects of your health. So in that case, I find it really helpful to map out your habits in a way that, so this is just a very simple thing. You can actually just do it on a plain piece of paper to understand why you're choosing those particular foods. So every habit that we have is made up of a trigger, the behavior itself, which is the habit, and a result. So it might be that after a long day at work, you're tired and stressed, and grab a bar of chocolate on the way home, to have in the car on the way home, and kind of soothe yourself, reward yourself for getting through the day or something like that. And the result of that might be, pleasure from eating the food, but also sometimes, a frustration with yourself or worry that this is, a habit that is kind of you've lost control of. It's kind of just exploring that, whatever that might be for you. Everyone is different, but it's very helpful just to map out what you think is triggering you to buy such and such or to eat a particular thing that you might have a kind of more of a reliance on. And sometimes by looking at whatever we've written down for the trigger, we can better address that trigger in a different way. So for a lot of people, it's, planning ahead, planning forward, or having kind of healthy snacks they're still going to enjoy on hand for when they are hungry. Or some people, it's, not going too far long between meal times, getting to that really hungry stage where we really crave sugar. So it really depends on that, but it's really helpful to map it out that way. So taking control of salt. So in terms of our salt intake, salt is made up of sodium and chloride, two different compounds put together. And it's the sodium part of that is the damaging part. That's the one that damages our blood vessels and increases our risk for heart disease. And in a way, it's like, I always think of it like a sponge. Sodium holds on to extra fluid. So we end up not peeing out the fluid, we hold on to it, and it puts our heart under more pressure when there's more volume to pump around. And it increases our blood pressure as well because there's more volume of blood to pump around. And if you think about a hose, and if I was to turn up the tap on a hose and the water pressure was to go higher through that hose, the inside lining of that hose would be more likely to get damaged from that high pressure of the water going through it. And that's what happens in our blood vessels. So if we have higher blood pressure, if we're holding on to more fluid, you're more likely to damage the inside of the lining of your blood vessels, making it easier for plaque, for cholesterol-rich plaque to build up. So the really good thing about salt is when we reduce it, we see clear changes. We see direct reductions in blood pressure, and you can see that within a month as well. So it's a really powerful change to make. We are in Ireland, we generally eat way too much salt. So the World Health Organization says we should be eating no more than 5 grams of salt a day, but on average in Ireland, we eat about 10 grams a day. Now, I'm sure that I think everyone on this call will be eating a lot less than that because I think you'll be a lot more tuned into salt than the average person. But it just goes to show you that it's kind of a wider thing. It's not often down to us, the salt that we eat, because most of it is not what we add in ourselves. It's only about 15% is what we add, or about 10% is what we add in at the table or in cooking. About 15% occurs naturally, and 75% of the salt that we eat is already in the food. So really, it's a case of looking at the types of foods that we're eating rather than focusing on the salt shaker on the table. So where are we finding most of the salt? Well, the Food Safety Authority of Ireland has research to show that over half of the salt that we eat tends to be from processed meat or fish. So we're talking about, sausages, hams, salamis, rashers, that kind of thing, and bread. So bread is not it doesn't really necessarily taste salty, but it's very high in salt. We also find it in lots of sauces like ketchup or soy sauce, or lots of ready-made sauces and ready-made meals. and savory, salty snacks, so crisps, pretzel sticks, salted popcorn, that kind of thing. Packet soups, and that would go for, you know, stock cubes as well, gravy granules, that kind of thing. So they tend to be our big hidden sources of salt. So what do we do about this? Well, number one, we can make home cooked meals the norm. So using fresh food that is not processed, not too processed, is automatically going to cut out loads of salt. If you're preparing food at home and not buying on the go or eating out. So trying to prepare as many meals at home as you can from real foods that are kind of whole foods and not too processed. And when you're choosing, let's say, meat or fish in the supermarket, try to choose, you know, unflavored or unbattered, unbreaded, uncured, just, you know, a piece of fresh fish or, you know, beef or chicken, whatever it might be. Also, if you're using, the same will go for vegetables as well. So let's say if you have a tin of sweet corn or even a tin of kidney beans or butter beans, sometimes they might be tinned in a salty, you know, water and salt, a brine solution. If you just pop them into a little sieve and rinse it all under the tap before you use it, that'll reduce the salt content of those by about 30 to 40%. So really, really good. And then little things like choosing roasted nuts instead of roasted and salted nuts. And add flavor. So if you're taking away salt, our taste buds don't like that at the start. We get used to high levels of salt, so it can be very hard to change. So make sure you're really oomping in that flavor wherever you can with as herbs, spices, extra onions, extra garlic, citrus, you know, lime zest, lemon juice, root ginger, any spices you want, vinegars, and using even cooking methods that add a bit more flavor. So searing something in a pan rather than boiling something, you know. And also being sauce savvy. So trying to choose the reduced salt options when possible. So, you know, reduced salt stock cubes, reduced salt gravy granules, or making your sauces from scratch if you can at all. And don't add salt. So don't salt water when you're boiling potatoes or vegetables, and try to keep the salt cellar out of sight. Now, if you do want to add in salt at the end, you know, at least you can do that under your own control. But when you're not adding things, the salt in through full salt stock cubes and all of that, you end up holding the cards, you know, the control as to how much salt you decide to add in at the end. And have patience as well. So it takes time for your taste buds to adjust to salt. When you don't have salt, your taste buds do really notice it for the first while. But the good news is that you grow new taste buds every 2 weeks or so. So within about 6 weeks or so, we tend to be able to develop a new taste palette, you know, a preference for less salty foods, and you'll really notice when there is salt in something. So just stick with it, have some faith and patience as well. And I'd also just like to add one more thing in here about bread, because I mentioned it earlier on the food pyramid, but if from that shelf of the food pyramid, your starchy foods, that if bread is the option on that shelf that you eat most of the time, and you're not really eating much, you know, oats or pasta, rice, potatoes, then it might be a good idea to introduce a bit more variety there, because we said the salt content of bread is quite high. Whereas if you go for potatoes instead, they tend to be much lower in salt. And same with pasta and rice. If you buy them plain and make your own sauces, add your own flavor at home, they're kind of handy ways to reduce your bread intake and give a bit more variety to the type of starchy foods that you're eating. And then for salt, reading reading labels on food, we have a really, I'm sure you've all seen it before, but we have a lovely food shopping cart that you can slip into your wallet, and it helps you to see on the label per 100 grams of the food, per 100 mils of the food, what is high, medium, and low in the kind of key things you're probably looking at. So specifically for salt, this is a pack of crisps. I won't say what brand, but you can probably guess from the color. And you can see the salt here per 100 grams is 1.5 grams. So we can tell from our traffic light system there, it's 1.5 grams, so it's in the red zone. So that's not surprising. It's a packet of crisps, but just a very handy way to put you in control of seeing what's high, low, medium in salt. And then one of the last things I want to talk about is about how we eat. So we've talked a lot about what to start including and what to change, but how you eat is just as important as what you eat. And I put in this picture of I have a little nephew who's 8 months old, and he's definitely at this stage of eating where it's sensuous, let's say, that all of the senses are alive. He's smushing every food into his face, and he's picking it up and smelling it and licking it. And there's a joy in that, you know, the joy of eating. And I'm not saying you have to eat like an 8-month-old going forward, but there's something in being deeply present with what we're eating and enjoying the food for what it is. So slowing down and taking a break between mouthfuls and really savoring the food that you're eating. There's also really lovely evidence to show that if you chew more times, we tend to eat a little bit less at meal times. So if you're looking to, if weight is a concern of yours, or you're trying to monitor your appetite and eat the right amount for you, this is a really lovely way to naturally do that. So most of us tend to chew about 3, maybe 5 times before we swallow. If you increase that to about 25 times, you'll probably eat about 10% less across all your meals. So very simple, practical thing to do, but really effective. And listening to your hunger cues and your fullness cues. So I often use the this hunger scale of kind of 1 to 10, and I'd say try not to go into a meal less, 3 out of 10 full, so you don't want to be ravenous going into a meal, because that's the time when we tend to reach for the quick sugary foods or the salty foods that are going to give us that quick hit. You want to make sure that you have a nice steady meal pattern, and you're going into your foods hungry, or into your meals hungry but not ravenous. And then you don't want to be leaving your meal 10 out of 10 full, maybe like 7 or 8 out of 10. So you're pleasantly full, but you're not uncomfortably stuffed. And slowing down, allowing your body time to register that you're eating food, is a really good way to do that. And then sleep. So sleep is, I know this is a talk about food, but sleep is really important. Sleep is your superpower. There is really good evidence now to show that people who get less than 6 hours sleep a night tend to eat up to 300 calories more the next day. So working on sleep can really help with your appetite and your connection to food as well. So little things like getting enough physical activity every day, getting time outside in the daylight, especially in the morning, reducing your caffeine intake after lunchtime, and having a wind down routine. Again, going back to my little nephew, like sometimes, when I go to bed and I'm waiting to fall asleep, but my mind is racing, I'm wondering, why is this? Why can't I just go to sleep? And yet I've given myself no wind down time like we would for, a toddler or a baby. And lastly then, if your appetite is poor. So what do you do if you are, you know, losing weight unintentionally? You might notice you've lost muscle mass. You might feel fatigue, extreme tiredness. You might be more prone to infections. First of all, do let your heart failure team know. Say it to your doctor, your nurse, and try get a referral to a dietitian to support you to maintain your weight. What I would recommend here is little and often. So try not to skip meals. If you can't stomach, you know, 3 big standard meals in the day, then go for 6 to 10 small meals across the day. So little and often can be a much easier way to eat when you've no appetite. And try to include some high protein foods at some of those meals as well, just to preserve your muscle mass and your bone mass. And enjoy a dessert once or twice a day. You know, if your appetite is poor, you really need to prioritize maintaining your weight. There's also lots of ways we can add extra nutrition into foods, and I can go into that if there's any questions on that. But yeah, also enjoying some nice nourishing drinks throughout the day, like full fat milk, fruit juices, lattes, hot chocolates, or creamy soups. So just really to pull this all together, a couple of practical things that I always think help in terms of making changes to the way you eat are, one, to set yourself some SMART goals. So something from this talk maybe that you would like to focus on changing. Write it down what you want to do and put it somewhere that you can see. So if is it on a post-it, you know, on your bedside locker or on the fridge or something, somewhere that you will see it and that is in your sight. And ask yourself, you know, track that change that you make. And I do it simply by just making myself a little on a plain piece of paper, just a little table for myself, and putting an X through the days where I go closer to the habit, or a tick or an X, whatever way you want to do it. So you're not getting into details every day. You're just thinking, did I move closer to my goal or more away from my goal today? And it's just a way of keeping that goal front of mind. And then lastly, to protect time for yourself for more cooking at home during the week. So planning forward. And I know you've heard this one before, and it is quite an old-fashioned tip, but it does work. You know, if you plan forward, you'll make healthier choices because healthier options will be available to you. And you're also more likely to think about nutrition and not buy randomly when you're in the supermarket. So even if you don't choose this every time, if you choose the healthy option most of the time, it's going to be an improvement and you'll reap a lot of rewards from that. So we have some lovely recipes up on our website on irishheart.ie if you would like any support to add in to try some new recipes. So there's plenty up there. And yeah, just to summarize what we talked about. So aim to fill half your plate with fruit and veg. Listen to your body and respect what it's telling you. Prioritize good sleep, and maybe spend a bit of time planning your week ahead and setting yourself up for success. So I am going to finish up there, and Maeve, I might ask you to stop recording so that we can take some questions now. But thank you very much for your time.
That's great, Orna. Thank you so much. It was so informative. And as you said there, I'm going to stop the recording now, and we're going to answer everyone's questions. You'll be glad to know there's loads who come in there in the chat. So Michelle might go through them for us.
Super. Yeah. Orna, thank you very much. That was